Hi guys, welcome back to another Hugh video, and in this video I'm going to be taking a look at this iPad Air 2 128GB Wi-Fi and cellular, still running iOS 8.1.2. I purchased this iPad for $120 on eBay in the parts not working section. It was described as a Wi-Fi only model with scratches, a cracked screen, but unfortunately also iCloud locked. This iPad Air 2 is a top of the range iPad with the highest storage configuration but also cellular, and paired with its original version of iOS 8, this was an iPad I had to buy. Taking a closer look at the iPad, you can see all the scrapes and scratches on the back from the previous owner, as well as a big scrape in the screen from obviously a drop or something along those lines. Powering it up, you can see here it unlocks with no passcode and is on iOS 8.1.2. Go ahead and check the about section. You'll also see that it is a 128GB model, which is also a cellular edition, which is a really nice feature. Now, the only big issue with this iPad was it's containing someone else's Apple ID, meaning that I was not able to sign in as my own Apple ID or erase the iPad. Now, I was lucky enough to find on the iPad itself the original documentation on the plan it was purchased on, which also contained the original proof of purchase, which I submitted to Apple over the phone. 3 days later, I received an email saying Find My iPad had been turned off and I was required to restore and update the iPad with iTunes. Obviously, I wasn't going to update the iPad, so I had to restore the iPad using another method. Trying to erase the iPad through settings won't work because when Apple removes the account online, it doesn't actually remove it on the device, which is why it requires it to be erased for that account to be removed. So the first method I decided to use was using Apple Configurator 2, a free app from Apple, but for some unknown reason it wouldn't reset all content and settings. It said it had to restore and update the device, and obviously that wasn't something I was looking to do. So in the end, I had to use the same method as I did with my iPhone 6 Plus 128GB on iOS 8.4.1. I had to set a passcode on the device, making sure to enable wipe after 10 failed passcode attempts. Then I could lock the iPad and begin to disable it, waiting time in between attempts to disable the iPad. Eventually, 3 hours later, on the 10th passcode attempt, entering the wrong passcode will result in the device wiping itself. During the wiping process, the iPad will display the Apple logo. After the wipe, the iPad will turn off, and after powering it back on, the loading bar appears and the iPad will eventually boot to the setup screen, where I can now set up the iPad as new. If you do this without first getting Apple to remove the iCloud account, the iPad will become activation locked, and that will mean you will not be able to set up the iPad. This is because activation lock is stored on Apple's servers, so wiping the device will only lock it further. If you get Apple to remove iCloud but do not wipe the device, Find My iPad will turn back on when you connect it to the internet. But once a reset is done, you can sign in with your own Apple ID. So this is it. The iPad Air 2 Space Gray 128GB Wi-Fi and cellular on iOS 8.1.2. This was a great deal considering the specs for this iPad Air 2, but also the fact that it has never been updated. I was extremely lucky to find the original proof of purchase on the iPad itself and have Apple remove iCloud lock. Unfortunately, the previous owner never used a case or screen protector on the iPad itself, so there's a big scrape and a few dents and scratches on the iPad itself, which is a bit of a shame. As for iPads on original firmwares, I also have an iPad 4 32GB Wi-Fi running iOS 6.0. As for devices that were released on iOS 8, I also have an iPhone 6 Plus 128GB running iOS 8.4.1 and my iPod Touch 6th generation 16GB on 8.4. This iPad Air 2 is the newest iPad I own in my collection and is what I would consider the greatest iPad that I have in my collection because it's a top of the line model on its original iOS version. And on that note, this has been a Hugh video. If you like what you saw, hit that subscribe button and consider checking out the iOS devices on original firmwares playlist, as well as checking out my social media, link will be in the description. That's all for this video, and I'll catch you guys next time.